I tend to choose simpler movements for a mindful movement practice. Um, and that's for a few reasons, because if I want the focus to be on mindfulness, simplicity really helps. If I am teaching a class where we're trying to do harder and harder movements or more complex movements, that's going to take the focus off of the mindfulness and probably bring it into the realm of safety. Like, how do we do this more complex thing safely? Or how do we dig into the intricacies of how to do this more elaborate movement, right? If we're trying to do handstands, and I've taught handstands, it's fun. It can be empowering, it can be a great thing, but a lot of focus needs to go into how to do that safely, how to get a room full of people to do that, in a way that's okay for their wrists and their shoulders, and where they're not going to fall out of it or kick somebody on the way up or down, right? And that doesn't leave a lot of space for teaching about, awareness and mindfulness. That said, of course, you can do a mindful handstand. And if you're able to do a handstand mindfully, it's probably a safer handstand. And that's great. But that's probably not the level that most people need to be met on when it comes to mindful movement practice, right? So I think that what I'm more interested in is how we can encourage people to get interested in what's more subtle rather than always going into this, like, we have to progress or we have to do harder and harder and more complicated and cooler things over time. Like, actually, can we flip that and get interested in what's more subtle, what's quieter, what's been a little under the surface, and look a little deeper in that different direction? So that's a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of a lot of what movement practices look like in many cases. So, choosing simpler movements. It is less about the what than the how, as I said earlier. And that's, part of the reason that we include different modalities, because it doesn't really matter necessarily. Any movement could be an opportunity or a vehicle for teaching a mindfulness skill. Um, but I do also think that some of the different movement practices have really unique gifts to offer us in terms of mindfulness. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. This approach gives the power back to the student. Because if we are less interested in, like, okay, I've got to get everyone to the point where they can do this pose or this really elaborate, Tai Chi form or whatever it might be, then it takes a lot of the pressure off of the student and the teacher and gives the student the power to just choose for themselves what feels good, what feels welcome, what feels friendly, what feels safe in that moment. I think in the field of movement, I think some of you who are yoga teachers will relate to this. There's been a lot of pressure on the instructor to teach in a way that's safe, or to know a lot about anatomy and biomechanics so you can keep people safe. There's definitely value to that and to having a working knowledge of the body. But I really think that safety doesn't come from me being really good at supervising all of you and knowing everything that's going on in every person's body, because it's not possible. What works is if I can teach you to feel your own body. I can never feel your body, only you can feel your body. But if I can help guide you to feeling your body more and more clearly and to making kinder choices for yourself, that's what creates an environment of safety, right? Offering simple and accessible movement practices is our role as the teacher. Reasonable practices for most people, but also this piece is so important of giving that power back to the students to make their own choices, to show them what some options might be, and then to really give them the space to choose for themselves on that day what feels safe and what feels good. Right. So it's less about me seeing you in Warrior Two and looking at your knee and seeing that it's dipping in a little bit and then having a little panic attack about your alignment and going, oh my gosh, move your knee over your ankle, so that you will be safe. how I might approach that in a mindful movement space instead of like correcting your alignment based on my assumption of what is good is I might come over to you, look over to you and say, how does that feel in your knee when you're in this pose right now? How does it feel in your knee? What are the sensations there? What if you engaged your thigh muscles a little bit more? What happens then? Oh, is there a little movement or oh, does it feel different? What are you experiencing now? So, can you sense the difference in that conversation versus it being kind of a top down thing where the teacher knows best and, from their point of view of the checklist of, alignment and safety that they tell you what to do versus they ask what you're feeling and try to guide you into an experience of making that determination for yourself?